Welcome to Demystify Magic with Molly and Madison.
I'm Molly, a former skeptic, now full-time energy healer, author, and your resident science meets spirit nerd.
And I'm Madison, a born and raised witch, teacher of the craft, and owner of not one, not two, but 3 metaphysical businesses.
Together we dig into low-effort witchcraft, spirituality, and the science that backs it all up, all with humor, heart, and a sprinkle of chaos.
So whether you're a curious skeptic or a seasoned witch, find a cozy spot, take a deep breath, and let's demystify some magic. Howdy doody, friends.
Howdy doody, friends.
I'm very excited. We have a very special guest today. We are talking to Nicholas Pearson about his upcoming book, The Witching Stones. Nicholas Pearson is one of today's leading voices in crystal healing and gemstone magic. The author of several books, including Crystal Basics and his upcoming The Witching Stones, he offers a blend of science and spirituality, like some people you might know, alongside a grounded, practical approach to working with crystals.
I'm so excited, Nicholas, to A, meet you, and B, geek out with you, because I feel like it's so rare to find someone in that intersection of like crystals and science. So I'm very excited about.
Well, I'm also excited. I've been looking forward to this for a while. I think Madison can attest to like me sheepishly being like, hey, so
Which
do
is
you
so
ever
funny
need guests?
because when you came and did a class at Spellcrafter, and the whole time I was like, you can do it. Just ask him to be on the podcast. Just ask him if he'll come be on the podcast. So it worked out perfectly. And I'm very excited.
And then she sent me a voice note. She's like, you'd love him. He's a scientist. I'm like, perfect.
I know it feels weird to be outnumbered.
It's funny. Like my day job now is actually doing science, and I didn't expect that to ever be the case because I kind of walked away from several different, we'll say, paths in the road and to eventually do what I do now. And I've come full circle and I'm back in the science sector, although, you know, it's more paperwork than anything, which I'm sure it's true of any science. But yeah, I get to do earth science in the format of museum collections management, but I'm still doing experimental analysis of things because labels have been separated from rocks and written records have been separated from rocks, and it's a lot of mysteries that need to be solved.
That's so cool. I'm so excited to dig into this. But before we get started, Nicholas, we start every episode sharing a magic moment of the week. So this could be a moment of gratitude or appreciation, something cool that happened that was unexpected, some way the universe or your practice showed up for you. Do you have a magic moment you want to share with our listeners?
I do, and it's kind of weird, which is like the theme of my life these days. I am several varieties of nerd all kind of rolled into one. One of those is a musical nerd, not as in I love musicals, the format, they're great or whatever, but I play the French horn. So I have been trying to manifest an opportunity to take my really niche hobby of like historically informed performance on pre-modern instruments to like a new setting. And I had an opportunity to do a workshop at a university with my collection of historic horns for the students, and like seeing them get excited and seeing the light bulb moments and like receiving meaningful questions was like the best feeling in the world. And just being able to share that love is magic for me. And that made my whole week.
That is the coolest thing I've ever heard. I've been wondering, in the background, you do have what I assume is a French horn now that you said that. And I've been trying to find a way to subtly be like, is that a tuba? Is that what is that?
Yeah, so that is an anonymous Austro-German horn from around 1890. So it is one of my oldest instruments in my collection. And I've been playing a lot on that one, but it was one of the ones the kids got to play, and it was phenomenal.
Oh, that
So
is
cool.
so cool. When you said being asked meaningful questions and like the magic that is, that resonates really hard for me. There's nothing that feels better than someone asking a really good question when you're teaching something. It's like just a proof that, you know, of the
They're
magic
listening.
that exists. Yeah, you're listening, and there's a magic that exists in this space, and we're like connecting on this level. It's so great.
I love that. I love that. I'm really curious. I'm going off script. I'm sorry, Madison. I have to ask this. How did you get into all of this? Like, how did you because you're talking about like museums and science and all this stuff. Like, how did you go from like, I don't know. How did you get into like the science of like crystals and starting writing about them? Like, walk us through that journey.
Yeah, so here's like the Reader's Digest version. I've always been a nerd, so that remains throughout. That will become self-evident the longer I keep talking. Um,
Relatable.
yeah, the other like really important facet in this is kind of strange to appreciate at first. I didn't grow up in a particularly religious household, but I'm from like the deep South where people do religion on weekends. I don't really, to this day, I'm not entirely sure what that means for other people. My dad was raised super Catholic, like very, very, very Catholic, parochial school, everything. And he'd had enough of religion that I wasn't raised with anything. So when other families did church on weekends, we did the library on weekends. So,
Mm.
one week it was a book on folklore and fairy tales or world mythology or, Greek or Egyptian myths. And the next week it'd be whatever accessible science text I could get my hands on. I've always loved nature, plants and
Mm.
rocks and marine ecosystems. And pretty early on, my little still forming brain just observed these two parallel interests of mine and said, well, they're both doing the same thing. They're both explaining how we relate to the world around us. One a little bit more poetically and symbolically than the other, and one through a lot more measurement and data driven than the other. And I've had no problem reconciling them ever since. It turns out that I intended to devote my life to music because it was where I got the biggest scholarship. And I was, as the paperwork says, I was randomly assigned to a museum that we had on campus at Stetson University, which has a really prestigious music ed program. Their entire music school is wonderful. At the time, I didn't know much else about the rest of the school. I chose it for exactly one purpose, to go study the horn. And a couple weeks into my time as a freshman, I realized if I just show up to this work study assignment, they will pay me. So my Capricorn took over and was like, well, I just got to find out where this building is. This damn nonsense. Like, let's just go there. I was registered pretty late, so I expected it was going to be in more or less the building next door to the music building where a lot of the visual arts were housed. I was wrong. I asked an upperclassman and a trumpet player because they have all the answers, or they think they do, where this Gillespie Museum was, and he looked at me like I'd sprouted another eye, and he said, "The Gillespie? Why would you want to go to the Rock Museum?"
Oh,
So, needless to say, it was a match made in heaven, and I got to do things that I'd never dreamed of. I got up close and personal with minerals that I never would have had access to before, so long as I was science forward whenever we were interfacing with the public. The director at the time and the curator, who eventually became my academic advisor, both didn't mind what I did in my personal life with rocks and minerals, and eventually waking up to the fact that I had no great desire to teach high school band for the rest of my life, which was pretty much like the end product of the degree I was seeking, because I also had no
Hmm.
intention for the higher education that comes after that to do something more with it. My would-be academic advisor, Dr. Bruce Bradford at the Gillespie, he said, Nicholas, you're unhappy. Everybody can see it, but you're brilliant with science. Come join us. Like, let's do something. We'll do independent study. I'll be your academic advisor. We can do more than Geology 101, which is all Stetson offered at the time. It might actually be all they still offer. And so that's the way it worked out. I eventually ran out of money though, so like other things happened. I almost immigrated to Japan instead of
Wow.
for corporate America. And then one day I started writing a book, and I haven't ever stopped ever since. So here we are.
Incredible.
wow, that's amazing. Well, launching into your newest book, I was reading through it and I was surprised, which maybe I shouldn't be, knowing that specific intersection that you have, by some of the things that you included. That list of those 14 stones that you have in there are really diverse. So, I guess my first question is kind of many questions wrapped in one. First of all, how did you land on those stones? And can you tell us what they are? And then, were there stones that you wanted to include but didn't make the cut?
Oh yeah, this is a good question. So I'm gonna
Yes.
attempt to do this from memory in order. This may or may not
We'll
work out.
we'll be quizzing you.
Right?
There
Yeah.
will be a grade.
There will be a test at the end.
So the 14 stones, probably in the order in which they appear in the book, are flint, hagstone, ammonite, fossil urchin, salt, or the mineral halite, lodestone, the mineral magnetite, lead, toadstone, a pseudo-mythological gem, and then in no particular order, amber and jet, crossstone, which is really two stones in one, starlight and castolite, quartz, moonstone, and emerald, and that might be 14.
I think
That was
I
14.
think
Yeah,
that
I
was in
counted.
order as well. I was
Hell
just going through it
yeah.
this morning.
A round of applause.
Good job. Wow, impressive.
Oh, thank you. So how did I arrive on those stones? Some were really obvious up front. I was actually putting together curriculum for an entire workshop on flint. It sounds very nerdy, but that's very on brand for me. And I just knew that there was more to that story, especially its intersection with magic, than I could fit into that particular class. I'd come off of earlier that year, this was 2023, I'd come off of doing this incredible trip to the UK, co-facilitating a retreat with my best friend in the world, Ashley Levy of the Love and Light School of Crystal Therapy. We put together this marvelous experience for us selfishly, but also for the group of people that we got to bring along with us. And we focused a lot on the stones of the land. And a lot of them are really humble rocks and minerals, like flint, like certain kinds of fossils, like, common gypsum rock, as opposed to, really fine selenite and so on and so forth, limestone and shale, and just things that are special to me, especially when we look at them through the geological lens and we understand their stories through deep time, which is like how we refer to time that just boggles the human mind. There's so much to them when we can kind of take a step back and see the whole arc of their formation, their interaction with the environment, the stories they continue to tell as they continue to interact with their environment. And so I put together this workshop on flint at the same time that I'd been invited to contribute an essay to a somewhat biographical book called Scott Cunningham, The Path Taken by Christine Cunningham Ashworth, who is Scott Cunningham's sister. For anyone who doesn't know, Scott's a legend in our field. This
Mm-hmm.
book is part memoir, but also part contributions from other folks that talk about his legacy. So the editor for the project, who is editor at large at Wiser Books, Judica Illis, invited me to see if I could squeeze in. There was a very finite word count. Like, if you can make it this long, we can put something in the book, but I can't think of anyone better to talk about his legacy with crystals than you. So could you?
Wow.
So I did, and I'd been really stuck on my previous project. So earlier this year, I had a book come out called Crystals for Psychic Self-Defense, and it has just been stalled in limbo for years. I've never worked on a project for as long as I did that. And by this point, I was still only halfway through that time, and I didn't know it yet. I thought I was gonna finish. I was wrong. Um, but this, like, just under 1,000 words was like the best thing I'd written all year. And it wasn't even for my project, but coupled with like that experience and being inspired by Flint, I kind of bent Judica's ear to say, hey, I have this idea that's kind of inspired by another Wiser book, Harold Roth's The Witching Herbs, which is fabulous. And I've wanted to for a while do something kind of like that with stones and be, not a carbon copy, because I'm not going to teach people how to grow stones the way he teaches you the horticulture of plants. Like, it just doesn't work the same. But I could substitute that for the geology, and I do want to make it really practical, but also really kind of esoteric. And she was really in favor of it. So I submitted that proposal, and here we are. So I had to pick things that I could write about, like I could write about Flint. And that was ultimately like what the barometer was. So the list was definitely longer than 14. I knew up front that Amber and Jet needed to be a chapter together because symbolically throughout history, they were regarded as two varieties of the same substance, even though we know better. Same with like crossstone. We know that these are two separate species of minerals, sterlite and castolite, but geology is a pretty young science in the grand scheme
Mm.
of things. And so they didn't know that. And until not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. So really, did they exist long enough in history? Was there a really deep body of magical lore? And did they excite me? Those were the three parameters.
Mm.
One of my personal challenges anytime I write a new book on rocks is I also have to include something I've never written about before. And with only 14 stones, that made this a challenge. That's why Toadstone worked its way in there. And there are definitely lots of things I wish I could have included. I really thought about trying to have a chapter on the carbuncle, which we usually regard as garnets and the pyrope series, but they don't necessarily have to be. They could have been other red stones. I considered maybe having a chapter on amethyst. I considered maybe having maybe a chapter on metals at large because I really wanted to write about copper, but it worked out that this set of 13 chapters, 15-ish stones really found their way in, and that's what I settled on. It became kind of organic, and then the placement of them in the sequence also worked out for it. So I think those are all three parts of your question.
Yes, they were. I know. Hit hard for the first one.
So what you're saying is Flint really sparked this whole idea.
I did in more ways than one. And if I can wax poetic about Flint for just a brief moment.
Please. I want to know, I want to know, like, what are your favorite facts about Flint? Because when Madison was listing off the stones to me, I was like, I've literally never thought about Flint in my entire life. And I'm so curious about, like, why that was the one that was included, but also so inspirational that it kind of literally like generated this entire idea for you. So please geek out for us.
Oh my goodness. Well, now that I've really got the stamp of approval, watch out. So, in no uncertain terms, Flint has changed the course of human history several times over. Though evidence is scarce about the indigenous interpretation of Flint in these settings in like Stone Age and earlier, we do understand that it had symbolic value, which is very significant because most, shall we say, Western scientists don't like to attribute symbolic thinking until much later in human history. But the treatments given to flint objects, to flint nodules, to the flakes that come off of flint artifacts suggest not just symbolic thinking, but symbolic acting. In other words, ritual. So flint is probably the earliest evidence we have of ritual use of stones. And
Wow.
it predates Homo sapiens. We have evidence of, for example, an Acheulean hand axe, which is like the original Swiss Army knife. You can cut with it, you can scrape with it, you can pound with it. End of list. But that was a multifaceted tool in the era. But there's one really prime example of these that's in a very small museum in I want to say south of England that has a little fossil urchin in it. And the position of the urchin in the nodule that was kind of supposed to be this double-edged tool is such that it was perfectly centered in what would have been the finished object, but there is one flake missing from the urchin. In other words, one hit with whatever the percussive instrument was accidentally took a flake off of that fossil and damaged the aesthetic value, and so they stopped working the blade. But its context and continued use shows that it still had value. It couldn't be a practical value because it was not a finished tool. This artifact may be upwards of 450,000 years old.
Whoa.
So we're talking like Homo habilis, Homo erectus. This is well before Homo sapiens is around, let alone in charge of stuff. So symbolic thinking with flint goes a really long way back. The use of flint with iron-rich ores like pyrite to start fires is something we have some tenuous evidence of that goes back to like the Neanderthal era. We see the working of flint deposits from deep underground in places like Neolithic sites in England that also suggest really great symbolic importance of these sites and flint retrieved from these sites because it was easier to just go through the gravels and find whole nodules, to pick them up by the riverbeds, to find the dry surface level deposits. And yet there's evidence of ritual activity in these shafts in like the chalk strata where you've got, these beds of flint. And what I find really fascinating is that it is descending into a literal other world, the underworld, the abode of the ancestors, of the spirits, the gods, however they conceived of that world beyond. We can't actually know. They didn't leave us instructions, sadly. It was, before the birth of writing. But to understand that flint coming from these liminal spaces had greater value, both as a material good for hunting, for defending, for starting fire, for cooking things. They used them as pot boilers. They'd heat up big rocks and put them in earthenware that wasn't fire safe so they could still boil things to cook. Like flint transformed society. but flint that came from transformational places carried with it greater value. And that's actually echoed in its geology as well. So I think the coolest thing that I learned about flint in the writing of this book is that geology, like all sciences, is always willing to reinterpret data when we have a more sophisticated understanding of it or when we have a better data set. And the predominant theories on flint production in these chalk beds has changed a lot from like the 70s, 80s, 90s, even like when I was in school in Geology 101 in the mid 2000s. Our picture of how flint formed was just about identical to like books that I've got in my collection from the 70s. And it was basically you've got silica rich stuff in the primordial sea that settles as sediment. It gets, thrust up into dry land as the water evaporates and the landscape changes and meteoric water comes through. In other words, rainwater, melt from sleet or hail or snow or whatever it might be, percolates through, dissolves that silica and deposits it in flint nodules. The main problem with this theory that never occurred to me then is the sea would have had to rise and fall so many times to create those distinct strata. If you look at like the white chalk
Mm.
cliffs of Dover in England, or if you go to the Netherlands or France, or other places where we've got these like beautiful chalk strata, they're like distinct bands of black flint throughout them at regularly occurring intervals. It's not exactly the same distance, but it's the same amount of time between them.
Wow.
And so it can't have been the sea level rising and falling. And they've come to figure out that the formation of flint is tied to the tiny little wobble in Earth's axis. And so over periods of like 20,000 plus years in a single cycle, you get phases in which we have more sunlight coming in to this hemisphere and less sunlight coming into this hemisphere in the opposite, in the other hemisphere. And what this does is it predisposes blooms of certain kinds of organisms in the primordial seas every, I think it's like 26,000 years maybe or whatever. They're called Milankovitch cycles. And this yields regular changes in the chemistry of of what becomes the flint beds that inside this chalk strata. And so you've got, big periods of carbonate rich rock and short intervals of silica rich rock. And that silica rich rock is forming in the space down in the primordial goo before it ever became a rock, where the anaerobic and aerobic bacteria meet and do their decomposition. So it's literally forming in the meeting space, the other world, the in between of where things that
Whoa.
require oxygen for their cell respiration, things that don't. And just where they meet is where flint can form. And that's why it occurs in these regular intervals. It started underwater and was only later kind of weathered out and dried, and now we can see it. But this stone taken from liminal spaces with a liminal symbolism was formed under liminal circumstances. And when we see how the geology, the history, the material use, the culture, and then the later folklore, which we didn't even touch, which is also, very otherworldly, it all converges, it all echoes one another. And that to me speaks of something that is a greater design. This isn't just we're looking for a pattern that isn't there. There's a pattern, and we are waking up to that pattern. And
Mm.
that's kind of what I endeavored to do with all of the witching stones, was to look for these bigger patterns. And when we understand that, it also fuels our magic differently. It's not just
Yeah.
a symbolic tool that folklorically we associate with the other world. It comes from the other world. It comes from the veil between the worlds, in fact. And therefore, when we work with flint, we can easily have a toe on each side of that threshold and travel at will between here and not here. And that is like the hidden mystery of flint.
Fascinating.
Holy
I'm so
shit.
I know. I keep having to check my face because I'm just like my jaw is just getting lower and lower and lower. I'm I'm so curious, Nicholas, and you kind of touched on this at the end, but I'm curious, like, how do you balance in this book all of the scientific understanding with the magical belief in the book? Like, how does that balance work itself out?
Ultimately, I don't have any problem myself being in the science field and being in the magical field. I
Mm,
think each one enriches the other.
same.
If I approach all of my magical spiritual activity, among other things, as data collecting, then I'm willing to suspend belief and disbelief until I can see a trend emerge.
Mm,
And that I think is just good advice for magical practitioners in general.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've got to make sure we're not leaning too hard into confirmation bias. And if we're too hard of a skeptic as well, then we're also not willing to look for the successes that might be more subtle.
Yeah.
So I think wearing the scientist hat makes me a better occultist because I'm willing to like figure stuff out. I'm willing to be wrong. I'm willing to be right. I'm willing to be kind of neither. But then having that kind of magical lens that is looking for connection, that seeks a more interpretive approach, an inspirited approach to the world around me, I think makes the work that I do that is less magical more meaningful.
Mm.
If we think about how science and magic are two ways by which we derive meaning from the world around us, then whether we're doing it through poetry or data, we're still trying to find our place in the world. And that I think is important. So the book has very few cursory geologic facts that mean nothing to
Mm.
the magical person. Of course, I have to say, moonstone is a gemological term given to a variety of feldspars. And
Mm-hmm.
here's what we know about feldspars. And I have to do that or I don't sleep at
Mm-hmm.
night as someone who
Yeah, yeah.
science. But then hopefully later on, some of that information comes back and has meaning. So what we know about the structure of feldspars, particularly the gem varieties that are often formed with thin laminae, the kind of twinning that gives us, the labradorescence of labradorite or the agilarescence of moonstone, there is a really interesting way that we as magically minded folks can see a kind of symbolic meaning in that structure. And so finding that hidden light in the earth tells us something important. When we look at the really rough birth that emeralds go through, I mean, we're talking massive plate tectonics involved because beryllium in the beryl and chromium responsible for the green in an emerald almost geologically never occur in the same environments. You got to crash unrelated rocks into each other. You got to drop in some seawater in that process. You are throwing things up to the sky to form mountains. Like it is massive. It is full of upheaval in more ways than one. And only under those circumstances are we likely to get emeralds. And so that kind of breaking things down and putting them back together is really reminiscent of Solve et Coagula, the kind of the principle by which we begin the alchemical process to dissolve or break things down and to recombine or to congeal to bring them back together. And of course, one of the most iconic, we'll say, mythic images of the emerald is the tabulus maragdin or the emerald tablet, which has the instructions of the alchemical art on it. The magnum opus is described poetically on it. So emeralds themselves are alchemical. So I try to balance the magic and the science by only including one enough to give us like real basic, it's barely geology 101 unless it is meaningful. And then we do the
Mm.
deep dive. So I really wanted to include geology that enriched our magical understanding and to tie that back in later in the chapter.
This is This is like, as you're talking, I am just like, this is the book I've been waiting my entire life for. Like, I want you to create a series and do every freaking stone on the planet. Like, I know it'll take you a minute, but like, if you could just set that up for me, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Because I'm a big nerd about like the lore and the history. I don't go deep into the science of, because geology, not my skill set, but I love learning like the lore and the history of different stones because I feel like it adds to my relationship to them. Like knowing jet was used as like a funeral stone and like protection from the dead and things like that has always added to my layer of like, oh, like this is why jet is used for protection now and whatever. And it helps me like develop that. I'm just so excited to get deep into like the nerdiness of it.
Yeah, and that folklore bit is something that I think there are a lot of crystal books that describe things in folkloric terms, but without
Hmm.
citing sources. And
Yeah.
I think this is true in a lot of fields, particularly in the kind of body, mind, spirit world at large. But because I've made a really hyper specific study of it with crystals, these two bookshelves, top to bottom, and in every nook and cranny, those are just my crystal books. Those are
Wow.
also
Wow.
just my crystal books that fit in this room. So there are some not on shelves that I have yet to figure out. I did buy a new bookshelf, and I don't know what to do with all of the empty space yet. You know, that one shelf.
Yeah, that one shelf.
Yeah,
Gotta get you some more
and I
books.
got one empty shelf out of it. So, there's a problem here where like folklore has not been handled with much finesse, and it becomes this
Mm,
game of telephone.
mhm.
And there are a couple instances in my writing career where I've cited things that retrospectively I go, I think someone made that up. I mean, once upon a time, all folklore was made up, right? But
Yeah.
usually it's rooted in some kind of lived experience or shared kind of mythic interpretation. And so I tried really hard with the folklore in this book to back it up with less woo-woo sources. They're good. They were
Mm,
inspirational. I still cite them, but to try to find some books that are maybe more devoted to folklore and less to crystal healing as reliable sources. And there were surprises along the way. Things that I'm like, oh, absolutely. There's got to be plenty of evidence for moonstones use in history. And then I struggled to find a like pre-Renaissance artifact made out of moonstone anywhere in the world in
mm.
in
Oh,
any
wow.
major or minor museum collection. Like maybe a couple of like jewel casings for texts that had moonstone set in them, maybe a couple, maybe one archaeological dig in India that cites moonstones, which makes sense because of the availability of it there. But like what we think of as moonstone is not what the ancient people thought of as moonstone. And we don't know what that was with absolute certainty, unfortunately. It could have been selenite, it could have been moonstone, it could have been quartz, it could have been chalk, it could have been jasper, it could have been opal. These are things that do not look like one another. But when we look at primary texts, the way they describe this rock and therefore the powers they attribute to it don't agree. So yeah, the folklore bit was probably, I think, where I won't say I struggled, but where I tried very hard to follow threads down to the very bottom wherever possible. And there were a few surprises. And I enjoyed being surprised, but it also meant that like the narrative I had in my head about Moonstone throughout history, it didn't work.
You just offered
Incredible.
me a perfect segue, and for that I say
Yes.
thank you. This episode is sponsored by Libro FM.
Here's a spell you didn't know you were casting every time you bought an audiobook. Are you feeding a billionaire or fueling the local bookstores?
And spoiler alert, if you're using that other audiobook app, you're probably helping a billionaire build his next spaceship while indie bookstores struggle to stay open.
Which is why we're fully obsessed with Libro FM. It's an audiobook platform that says no thanks, Mr. Tech Overlord, and instead lets you support a local bookstore of your choosing with every single book you buy.
Also, you actually own the audiobooks, like they're yours. They don't disappear if you stop your subscription. You can listen whenever, forever, as it should be.
And to sweeten the deal, you can click the link in the show notes of this episode and use the code DEMYSTIFY to get 3 audiobook credits for the price of 1 when you switch to Libro.
Clicking our link supports your favorite bookshop, your favorite podcast, and your radical little reader heart.
This isn't just a deal, it's a reclamation spell. Take your books back, burn the old system, build your own damn library. Switch to Libro FM today.
Thanks, Libro FM. My next question is, I'm so curious about those moments of lore that surprised you. And so were there any particular stones that you had one idea of when you went to write about and research that you came out with a totally different perspective?
Yeah. So, apart from like that kind of historic vacancy of moonstone artifacts, which leads us to questions about what we're really talking about folklorically, there are some others. I think one of the things that I was really pleasantly surprised by was how widespread the trade of English jet was in the Roman Empire. Like I knew it was a resource the Romans leveraged. I just didn't realize they took it to places like modern day Germany and Austria from the modern day Yorkshire, from Whitby, which is quite a hike. When I mean, you have roads, but they're not modern roads. You have people on foot and horseback and carriage and chariot. Like you don't have modern trade systems like we've got. I would say maybe the most surprising thing to me, also in the pleasant sense, relates to emerald. I've written a lot about emerald in the past. I really like it. It is one of my like personal teachers and my personal allies in the crystal world. And I'm never quite done with it. It always has more to teach me. It always has more to say. And I'm very comfortable admitting that probably most medieval and earlier descriptions of emeralds just refer to green rocks, any kind of green rock. And that's a culturally designated green, maybe not green by our modern Roy G. Biv kind of spectrum as well, which makes things even a little bit more convoluted. But the word emerald, we get it in English via French, emeraude, which comes from Vulgar Latin and Latin, smaragdus, which comes from Greek, smaragdos, and it just meant a greenstone. And so a lot of our kind of early depictions of emeralds are green objects. And so it's really hard to imagine, like particularly in our kind of nexus of the classical world, if you will, where emeralds really existed. But there's a Neolithic headdress from Northern Africa that has been discovered that has raw, uncut emeralds and I think bits of bone and claw in it. And so we have Neolithic emerald use. There definitely are sources for emeralds in Northern Africa. Ethiopia fairly recently had a new discovery, which is now quite scarce. There's the historic emerald mines of Egypt, which are not in production anymore and have not been for a long time. But to see that in the Stone Age, people were treasuring emeralds and then to, of all things, put them into a crown, because one of the most iconic mythic images of emerald, apart from like the emerald tablet, is related to two kind of linked images: the Holy Grail, the kind of alchemical crucible, if you will, and the crown of Lucifer, the Lightbringer. It was said to be, by a more recent reinterpretation, to house an emerald in it, and when he fell to the earthly plane from the celestial, that emerald was loosed from the crown and also plummeted. And that's birthed a lot of really interesting images and myth and literature, particularly the literature bit. But to see that there's a precedent of a Neolithic emerald crown, that's pretty magical to me. It's like it's echoes of the same image that reverberate through our collective unconscious. And I feel like all we're doing is kind of responding to those echoes repeatedly over and over again. And it's quite magical.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Like, I need my hands on this book like yesterday. I'm curious, like, with all of this, how do you hope this book changes how people relate to crystals and stones, like both energetically, practically, historically?
Yeah, I think there's a couple takeaways that I'm hopeful for. First and foremost, and I imagine maybe this is some feedback you've encountered in the field at large. There is an enclave of the kind of serious occultists who turn their noses up at crystals. Oh, that's new age woo-woo. Well, in fact, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
What you see touted in your average crystal book or for sale on shelves in your average crystal store is maybe not reflective of a pre-modern practice, but it is a link in a contiguous chain that extends into prehistory. For as long as humans have existed, we have used rocks and minerals and fossils and gemstones for magic. Our relationship to them, our interpretation of them has varied by culture and language and understanding of the world around us. What we think about in terms of energy is a fairly modern idea as well. We didn't necessarily couch the properties of stones in energetic terms in the medieval period. We use the concept of virtues, their kind of agency or influence. Whether a stone had virtue is also indicative of whether or not it was precious or non-precious, as opposed to, our gemological terms, which are unrelated, but sound quite similar. So, one is to really remind folks that what we do today is the inheritance of a very, very long tradition. And if we are willing to engage with that tradition, if we're willing to look to the historic record, to the folkloric record, to our mythology, as well as look to deep time in terms of the formation of these rocks in the earth, there is so much inspiration there for us. I wrote this book. I'll say I came up with this idea for the book at a time when I was starting to get really burnt out from writing, but already had something under contract and really wanted to finish. I liked that idea. I'm really glad that it's out. I think it's quite a nice book, but it boils down to I needed a change of pace, and the Witching Stones was that change of pace for me. So I hope it can go on to inspire others in similar fashion.
I'm already inspired.
Yeah, I was just about to
Like,
say, even through like I didn't get a chance to read the full thing before we met, but even just from what I got through, I have struggled with crystals. I think we've talked about this, where like the connection hasn't always really been there for me. And what gets me there is the folklore. I relate it to how like Anthony and I have gone about teaching the tarot is, it's one thing to get a book and read the keywords. It's another thing to have a relationship with the stone and to understand why those words are attributed to that thing, because it does go deeper than like, oh, blue stones for the throat because the throat energy center is blue. There is just so much more there that once I understand that, then I'm sold. I'm all in. And I do use and like develop a relationship with that crystal, and it becomes really valuable to me. But I don't often get there without that piece. And so I'm so excited that this book exists, and I'm excited to have it in the store and to, read more of it and have more of that folklore, because I do find it to be so interesting.
you're going to have to get a supply of flint.
I know. I'm like, where am I going to get my flint wholesale? that you do not see at the gem shows, and you should.
I know.
And I will be petitioning to our vendors ASAP.
Well, I might know a few folks, so we'll chat.
Please. Yes, please do. Send me some contact info. So I have a question, a little bit of a sillier one. If you were stranded on a deserted island, and I am going to give the caveat of you do have access to fire, because I think that kind of destroys the question immediately. Which one of the witching stones would you bring with you?
Emerald.
Ooh, why?
And no questions asked. It's emerald. One, I just like it. So I'm going to disclose my bias up front. But two, I think if I'm stuck on this deserted island and I have fewer distractions from some parts of the outside world. I mean, obviously survival is a pretty big distraction on your spiritual
Mm-hmm.
times.
No, it's a glamping deserted island.
Yeah.
You've got all the amenities.
Okay,
Yeah,
well,
your nervous system is settled.
excellent. Even better. This justifies my choice even more. Of all of the stones, I feel like emerald has the potential for the deepest and most intimate kind of healing. And if I were free of the distractions of everyday life, to really steep my heart in the virtues of emerald, the biggest healing would happen. So I want to kind of braid together a couple different streams of emerald interpretation. So we've talked about this alchemical essence, this connection to Lucifer's crown, and that gemstone through a strange interpretation of some unrelated myths, eventually getting written as commentary about an opera, being associated with the Holy Grail in the Parzival story, in that kind of Arthurian body of myth. We also, I think, can hold space for the fact that in a lot of crystal healing and gem therapy situations, we associate it with the heart and with love. And, mythologically, we connect it to the planet Venus, obviously named after the goddess of love. There is an interesting alchemy that takes place with emerald when we recognize that the story of Lucifer has a lot of different interpretations to it, and my favorites involve the descent from spirit into matter, the bringing of light into the material world to represent the kind of planetary logos, the divine intelligence or essence or demiurge of materiality. Without that light being here, we can't also be here. And because that light is here, we are. And there's nothing we have to do to be worthy of that. We exist. End of story. It's you matter because you are matter is the message of Emerald. To be worthy of the kind of unconditional love. And I don't mean love as like an ooey gooey romantic feeling. That's wonderful. I like it. I married a person because we've got that going on. But like the Emerald message of love is a deep cosmic primal force. It is the glue that holds the universe together. And when we recognize that in a world surrounded by messages of unworthiness, that true worth is not something you earn, it just is, it becomes a kind of radical love that Emerald teaches. So, in an island where I might feel lonely or might feel disconnected, but also might not be distracted by all those messages feeding me, oh, you're not good enough because of this, you don't make enough money, you haven't written enough books, you haven't cataloged enough rocks in the museum, or whatever it is, whatever our too much or not enough might be. Emerald says that when we recognize that we are worthy of love, despite those messages, it is such a radical and revolutionary act that we can change the world. So, if I were stuck on a deserted island, I would certainly want my world to change, but it'd be great if I could contribute to a bigger kind of changing, a bigger kind of alchemy in the world around me. Because by being that empowered, that sovereign, that radically in love with myself, finding that radical self-worth, other people can see that. And the other part of this myth of, Lucifer's light bringer, torchbearer, is kind of like the upper octave of Flint. Flint changes us by giving us mastery over fire. And this is a more refined kind of illumination. If I hold that torch of illumination up, I can light someone else's torch without diminishing my own light. And so that's the magic of Emerald. When I enter that space, unconsciously, I'm giving permission for others to enter that space too.
Damn. I'm like, shit, I gotta break out my emerald after this. I love that. Wait, okay, Nicholas, I'm gonna throw a curveball at you, because I always say if I were stranded on a deserted island, I would bring clear quartz because it's my fave. It's the one I always connect with. And I believe you said quartz was one of the witching stones. Can you give me a piece of information about clear quartz that will just blow my mind?
Mm. So I have to maybe be a little less specific on the definition of quartz here, in as much that historically we find maybe a lot of value placed on the common white quartz pebbles as opposed to transparent quartz, but they
Great.
occupy similar motifs.
Yeah, I love them all. I love all quartz.
Perfect. So we're just going to cast a slightly wider net. But here's something cool that I learned from some archaeological evidence that's been done in places like Ireland with some of the megaliths out there. The kind of ritual cursus paved with white quartz that leads to some of these structures. These were stones that probably would not have been mortared together. One, because they didn't have that technology. It was not a brick and mortar kind of society. And two, if you were engaged in ecstatic dance in progression on this kind of ritual path made out of hunks of white quartz that were slightly loose and could grind up against each other, you would be creating flashes of light as you went because of the triboluminescence in quartz. And perhaps some of the ritual applications for the so-called common white quartz are really rooted in these kinds of interesting relationships it has to light. We think of transparent quartz as being the pinnacle of light. It is light
Hmm.
embodied, it is frozen light, it is a natural prism and lens. Like, it is magical when it comes to light, but we forget that all quartz is triboluminescent, that all quartz has some pretty marvelous things that it does. And so it is an illuminator as well. In the book, one of the kind of primary focuses for quartz that I talk about, because it's really neglected in a lot of the more metaphysical, new agey resources, is about quartz in the spirit world and how, quartz specula, spheres, looking glasses, scrying tools weren't necessarily thought of in our kind of modern psychological means of this is a tool for self-reflection, this is a means of externalizing my subconscious mind. Really, it was more about I'm going to summon a spirit into this, or an angel will speak through this, or the land itself can be embodied in this stone to give its message to me. And seeing that same kind of motif, almost like an archetype, recur in different ways and different times, different cultures, I think quartz would be a great choice for a deserted island when we wanted to commune with the spirit of all around us, including the spirit of us. It is a natural magnifier. It is going to help us see the unseen in really sophisticated ways. Of course, it's also the all-purpose stone.
Yeah.
Quartz does a little bit of everything, and it does it all very well. The
Uh-huh.
jack of all trades and master of all of them. And if we could all be a little bit more like quartz, particularly those of us who are neurodivergent, I think we'd feel very satisfied in life. But yeah, quartz is super magical, and it is oftentimes I will be asked what is my favorite crystal,
Mm.
and I am evasive. Like, well, under which context? My favorite to collect, my favorite to use therapeutically, my favorite just because it's beautiful, my favorite in this book. Like, there's a lot of ways that I could answer that. So I have like a rotating list that's usually a top five, but quartz is always up there. And if we'd framed that question about the deserted island a little bit differently, if I were stranded on a deserted island and I could only collect one mineral species for the rest of my life, no hesitation, the answer is quartz.
That was our next question, believe it or not. No, just kidding.
Never get bored.
I know. Yeah.
So many different inclusions and associated minerals, and like every few years we find something that really is quite perplexing, surprising, and sometimes the geology behind it is really strange and unusual. I was recently asked about the blue smoke quartz or the blue mist quartz. Someone's called Veil of Isis quartz from Colombia, and someone's like, well, what's inside it that makes it look blue? And I'm like, oh, I love the answer to this. Are you ready? Nothing. Nothing is
What?
inside it. It's actually the absence of something that does this. It's a structural pigment. And and so there are these hollow tubes from something else that used to be in there, probably a clay mineral, but we don't really know. And so they're so minute and so close packed that it produces Rayleigh scattering, the same thing that makes the sky blue. So when you hold it up to the light, no blue pigment is in there. And so the blue mist quartz is blue because of nothing. But it's a very intentional nothing. If we fill that nothing in with something, it's just clear quartz. And that boggles my mind. I love how that is still a mystery. We've only recently found out that blue Tara quartz is not actually colored by amphibole, but by a blue variety of dravite tourmaline, which we usually think of as like brown or yellow. And so, I would never get bored collecting quartz and only quartz for the rest of my life. I'm a big quartz fan myself.
Wow. I have
I
no other
know.
words but just wow.
I'm speechless.
I'm just like, when are you going on lecture tour? I want to be at every single event.
Oh yeah, well, hopefully I'll be doing lots of it with the birth of this book, and with another book coming in the spring as well. I'll be pretty busy both online and in person. I'll be headed over to Spellcrafter soon as well.
Yes, yes, October 23rd. He'll be doing a class on the witching stones, signing books, hanging out. I'm really excited about it.
So yeah, it's such a great time last time I was there. It was such a wonderful group of folks, and the shop is fun. It's beautiful.
Thank
Um,
you.
sure. You've got good rocks, and I say that honestly. There, lots of times you go into shops, especially when I go into shops and they like want to show me their crystal collection. I'm like, oh, you have you have rocks, and largely it's because they don't know better, or they just don't have the resources, or whatever it's going to
hmm
be. I'm happy to celebrate whatever rocks someone has, but you
hmm
have good taste in rocks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow.
High
The,
praise from the likes
the
of
highest
you.
compliment. Wow. I'm like, do you want to see my
Yes,
rocks?
the answer is always yes.
I've got a hagstone right behind me. Look,
DM's always
it's
open.
good.
Okay, so our last question. A lot of our listeners have kind of, I think, had a similar approach to crystals as me of like, I love them, they're beautiful, but I don't always have like a strong sense of connection to them, and I don't always understand how to use them in my practice. For someone who might be new to crystal work, is there any like ritual or recipe from the book that you would recommend starting with?
If you're an absolute beginner and you are looking for something to do from the witching stones in particular, given the parameters of the question, I would say pick your favorite rock that's in the witching stones and try all the rituals and recipes in that chapter. So, with something like flint, there is a protection charm. There is this kind of igniting the witch flame ritual that's in there that brings that kind of
Ooh.
Luciferian archetype.
Ooh.
You've got, several different ways that it's used, but pick something that is magical to you. I think so. I have to divulge a hidden agenda the book has. I give it away in the introduction, so it's not hidden very well. But it is possible to read the book in any order you want to. You can go, I really want to start with quartz because it's my favorite rock, or who wrote a whole chapter on salt? This is absurd. Let's start there. You can do that. But when you read them and work through the exercises in the order in which they appear, which is why remembering the stones in order was meaningful to me. There is this kind of initiatic experience that takes place. So if you're new to rocks, I say, as tempting as it is to go, oh, moonstone is so pretty. I love the green of emerald. Quartz is just so lustrous. The more so-called precious gems at the end, they represent the kind of end phase of the arc the book goes through. Start with flint, start with hagstone, start with these really humble rocks and find the magic in them. It's easy to see why people thought quartz was magical. It requires a different set of eyes to find the magic in flint. So if you start there, and if you try any of the spells in there, the elf shot amulet, there's a sparking creativity spell, there's a healing section, flint medicine it's called, and then that igniting the witch flame or igniting the witch fire. Doing those things sets you up. It ignites a magical spark within you that the next chapter and the next chapter and the next chapter, all the way through all 13, builds upon. So the other side of that, and here's the kind of hidden agenda that I don't disclose quite as well. If you can find the magic in flint, the magic of hagstone, the magic of a fossil, the magic of salt, you can find the magic in every rock you meet. Any stone in the landscape. I live in Florida, as do you, Madison. Like, it's limestone.
Mm-hmm.
And also you can find limestone. And in some other parts, you can find more limestone.
Mm-hmm.
Often there will be pockets of calcite crystals and calcitized fossils. We do have deposits of flint towards the west coast. There's a place called Thanodisassa, which in the native language means the place where flint is found. So I have some Thanodisassa flint in my collection. I think I have one piece left. And we've got other things, agatized oysters, which are pretty rare, and agatized corals, which are more common. But if we find magic in the everyday, we're also going to find magic in our really rare and valuable minerals that are out there. I work for this mineral museum now, and I share to my stories lots of pictures of these incredible life-changing specimens. And aquamarine worth, I probably shouldn't say out loud, emeralds and matrix that would make your jaw drop. But there's just as much magic in the piece of diabase and metamorphosed metarhyolite and spherulitic chalcedony, like all these other things that maybe don't look as pretty on camera, but they tell such cool geological stories
Mm-hmm.
that I love that I get to spend a moment listening to those stories, interpreting those stories. So if you're new to rocks, it is tempting, and you have permission to read the book in any order, to just pick your favorite and start with it. But I promise you, if you start with flint and find the magic there, it will hopefully set the stage for you to find the same magic in every rock you meet, which means you're not just going to follow recipes in a book. You're going to make your own magic based on the relationship you have with the stones. And that's better than anything I could come up with.
Wow. I'm in.
I'm in. I'm all in. I know what I'm doing this afternoon. Thank you so much, Nicholas. We're so grateful. This has been such an amazing conversation. Where can our listeners find you?
Thank you both for having me. I'm so thankful we had this chance together. If you want to find me online, it's at the Luminous Pearl in most places. I'm definitely most active on Instagram, and I'm usually pretty good about answering DMs there if I see them. And then my website is theluminouspearl.com. I'll have a busy schedule of online and in-person activities, not just to celebrate the birth of the book, but for other things as well. So I look forward to connecting more in those virtual and in-person spaces.
Yeah, when does the book come out?
Thank you. So officially it comes out October 6th. So very soon.
Very soon.
Yes, at the time that this comes out, it will be available for purchase. We'll leave all the links in the description.
Fantastic. I can't wait to dive into it. Thank you so much. I feel like you've opened my brain up to just new ways of looking at crystals. I was like, yeah, I like the history of crystals. Now I'm like, I know nothing. I can't wait to get this book and use it as primary source material for all of my content going forward forever.
That means a lot. The book is there to inspire folks. So I'm grateful to know that it's already doing that.
Oh, hell yeah. Hell yeah. Thank you so much again, Nicholas.
Thank you both. And I hope you have a great day.
Yeah, you too. Till next time.
Till next week.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Demystify Magic with Molly and Madison. All our links, from spells to ceremonies to ways to support us, are waiting in the show notes.
We'd love to hear your magic moment of the week. share it in a review, tag us on socials, or bring it to our Patreon clubhouse at demystifymagic.com.
And remember, you are the magic.
Okay, love you.
Bye.
Does it ever feel like you're a marketing professional just
speaking into the void?
But with LinkedIn ads, you can know you're reaching the right decision makers, a network of 130 million of them, in fact. You can even target buyers by job title, industry, company, seniority, skills, and did I say job title? See how you can avoid the void and reach the right buyers with LinkedIn ads. Spend $250 on your first campaign and get a free $250 credit for the next one. Get started at linkedin.com/campaign. Terms and conditions apply.